And welcome to this Vodcast edition, this new feature we have put together at ExchangeWire. And today we're talking about the state of universal identifiers. And I am joined by Emma Newman, CRO of PubMatic, Jakob Bach, co-founder and director of Adform, and Matthew Roach, co-founder and CEO of ID5. Welcome to you all.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
So today we're going to have a 30-minute discussion about universal IDs because it is the hot topic in our industry at the minute. And we are going to have a sort of a wide range of conversation on the state of play for universal IDs in the ecosystem and where we're at and where we're going. So Matthew, we'll start with you first because it is important to kind of form a context, and obviously context is important in this industry, but form a context around the universal ID. Why is it so important to our industry? So just give us a little sort of an introduction there into that, and then we'll kick off the conversation in the state of the universal IDs.
Yeah, of course. So identity or user identification is what underpins digital advertising and the value that it creates for brands, right? It's what enables brands to target, to optimize and frequency cap their campaigns and to measure the performance, right? That's what we use identity for, to be able to know that a user has seen an ad and then has gone and purchased something, has seen 3 ads, and so stop showing them because you've got a cap of 3, right? All of those capabilities are underpinned by device and user identification capabilities. And for the past 15 years, we've used cookies and MAIDs to do that. As we know, third-party cookies are being deprecated by browsers. MAIDs, such as the IDFA in iOS devices, are going away. So we're at risk of losing this infrastructure that powers digital advertising and that creates value for brands and publishers. And so we need to think about something else. And this something else cannot be a third-party kind of platform-specific ID, because as a third party, you don't have access to the device anymore, right? So we need to build those shared identification mechanisms that we call universal ID, that other called unified IDs, or shared identifiers that can help buyers and sellers have a common framework to work with each other and to buy and sell data, buy and sell inventory, measure performance at an individual user level, because that's what creates value. That's what creates the value of digital advertising for brands and publishers.
And is it the case that this has to happen because otherwise money will just move to the walled gardens, the Amazons, the Googles, and the Facebooks who have that?
I mean, if a brand cannot measure the performance of its campaign, cannot optimize the delivery, cannot target its audience across the open web, because the open web doesn't offer those capabilities anymore, they will go to walled gardens where you still have one-to-one targeting and measurement capabilities, right? It's just because of value. It's not that they don't like premium publishers, that they like Google and Facebook better. It's just that from a value standpoint, from what you can do, they will just put even more of their investment in the walled gardens, right? And so what we're trying to build is an infrastructure that supports the open web, that supports premium publishers, the technology vendors that serve them, so that they can compete, and it give a valuable alternative to brands for where to invest their marketing dollars.
So I mean, we'll come to you, right? Obviously, this has been precipitated by, as Matthew said, the deprecation of third-party cookies and IDs in general. How from your perspective, how publishers that you work with are preparing to the deprecation of third-party cookies? Are you noticing a sort of more of a sort of pushing more towards this adoption of IDs because they have to, or is it still kind of like wait and see what happens next?
So I think that that's a really good question, and I think that I'm going to talk a little bit about a solution that we've launched, which is called Identity Hub. So and this isn't going to be a sales pitch, just so we're very clear.
That's fine.
Okay, so let me just explain what that is very quickly and why we think it's an important tool for the buyers and publishers at this precise moment in time. So PubMatic launched Identity Hub, which is our identity management solution, back in January of 2020. And as a business, we've seen that the digital advertising ecosystem was urgently looking for consumer-friendly audience addressability solutions. And the rapid expansion of ID choices was creating complexity. And we believe that buyers and publishers need less confusion and not more. So by building out on the open source code from Prebid, our Identity Hub addresses this challenge by simplifying the use of multiple IDs in an intuitive and easy to manage solution. I think that's crucial for publishers, ID providers, buyers, whoever they are in the ecosystem. Now, since we launched it, we've seen a great number of publishers adopting our solution across the globe, because publishers and advertisers are now looking to SSPs to actively A/B test and determine the efficacy and scale of the different ID approaches. Now, our initial learnings have taught us that publishers and advertisers need to actually take a diverse approach that incorporates independent ID solutions, browser-based solutions, cross-publisher solutions, and contextual targeting. And by doing that, then they will start to spread the risk that this current uncertainty is presenting. And what we've seen is that they're adopting a hybrid approach to prepare for the third-party cookie challenge. And they are testing identity solutions, reviewing the available data opportunities, and reevaluating the value of contextual advertising, which in turn complements the blended strategy that many premium publishers have adopted to revenue generation, which incorporates advertising, subscriptions, contributions, licensing, and syndication models. Now, for many, advertising remains the primary revenue driver, but rather than operating in a silo, which it's done in the past, advertising can now coexist in harmony with other revenue streams. And this has been made possible partly due to the ability to use data from each of those revenue sources to enrich the others, which delivers a better user experience, delivers greater audience addressability, improved campaign performance, and ultimately increased yield. So I think to answer your question, there's definitely adoption, but there's still a lot of learning that's going on.
Yeah, do you see a situation in like looking at what publishers are doing and looking at all different solutions that we're heading towards a world of multi-IDs, and how does that work from a brand perspective? Because it must be an absolute headache to have to use all these different IDs, or is it just the way we have to rethink sort of targeting and measurement in a privacy-first world?
Yeah, I think it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, to be honest with you. I think that's why we're actively encouraging people to do this testing right now, and I'm sure Mathieu and Jacob are seeing the same thing, because some identity solutions may work better dependent upon the channel. And some identity solutions may work better dependent upon the campaign objective. So actually working with more than one, and we actively encourage people to test, multiple solutions, be them identity solutions or other options that are out there. Sound like the BBC now. I think it's really important because we've got a window. The window's becoming smaller. Yeah. For us to undertake this testing and learning. And I think when we were chatting, when we were preparing for this, we sort of referenced GDPR, which, if you remember that, which feels like many moons ago now, right up until almost the day when it was launched, publishers were still saying, well, I don't actually have a CMP yet. I'm not entirely sure what my strategy is going to be. And so you've got this forcing function, and I'm hoping that we've learned from the GDPR experience, and maybe don't leave it right to the last minute and use this opportunity to test as much as you possibly can, and actively, buyers and brands as well to do that. Yeah.
Just one comment on the multi-ID question, Kieran, because it's not like, we're coming from a world that was even more complicated because each platform individually, right? Your DMP, your CDP, your SSP, your DSP, everybody individually had their own ID on a cookie. And so we already come from a multi-ID world that we've solved through matching, which never really, generated huge performance, right? Match rates, have always been an issue for scalability and addressability of audiences. So, it looks like, having several IDs is going to be complicated. Like, we already have several IDs today in a cookie-less world. So if anything, we're going to go from like thousands or hundreds to dozens, maybe less than that. So it is still a consolidation. It is still a simpler world, even though it might look a bit complicated right now.
Well, and I think there are other parallels. SSPs, I think, is a good example. it's only the recent years where agencies have cared which SSPs, DSP like ours buy through and done SPO, right? And I think it's quite similar with the IDs. In the end, the advertisers or the agencies shouldn't really care. As you say, there are many different IDs already, and with mobile IDs, etc. And it's handled in the background. And so on our platform, for example, we don't even give the advertisers the choice whether they're using ID5 or something else. We just use it automatically in the algorithms. And we, of course, set some prioritizations of whatever works best. And one day, I'm sure we will have the same development as with SSPs, that then, they want controls, and they might have, there might be special costs with some IDs, not with others, and you get optimization. But I think we are probably some time away from that sort of setup.
Actually, who do you think is actually moving quicker, buy or sell side? Who's getting an A and who's getting an E?
Well, I don't think it's about getting an A or an E. If you want people to come into your store, you need to have products to sell. So it is obviously a supply side marketplace. It's a supply driven marketplace, right? You need publishers to adopt. You need IDs to be available in bid requests, and once they're available in bid requests, buyers can start to look them up and build kind of targeting strategy with them. But it is definitely a sell-side driven marketplace. It has to be, right? You can't expect Adform to start bidding on something that doesn't exist. We're at the point where there is scalability on the sell side, right? And now we need more involvement from buyers, more DSPs to kind of lean in, more agencies to kind of tie their data assets to IDs. We're in that pendulum moment where like it's shifting more to the buy side to act, because a lot of publishers have now engaged with ID5 and others to make cookieless IDs available in bid request. But it has to start with publishers. No questions about that.
But then to just jump in there, to your point, you've got to have a product that people want to buy, hence publisher adoption. But don't forget then the publisher is then trying to sell that to the buyer. So the buyers also then need to understand what it is that they want to buy. And I think there's an enormous job to be done. I mean, if we think that perhaps publishers, are still testing and learning, there's an enormous job to be done also to educate buyers. And I mean buyers all the way through the supply chain, from the DSP to the agency to the brand themselves. And I think that, collectively, that's a job for the whole ecosystem. Yes, it has been a publisher sort of driven initiative because it's had to be, but it's all very well the publishers adopting all of these solutions. If the buyers don't know what to buy, how to buy, when to buy, what works, what doesn't.
Who's going to do that? How do you educate the buy side on that? Will there be like a standardized solution across? Because the problem I see is if you have different like fragmented ID solutions across all these publishers, it's going to be a headache for a guy in the trading team or a girl in the trading team to buy all these different IDs across 100 different publishers when they can, have one big entity like Google and buy all the rest. So how do you resolve that problem?
And maybe I can answer to that. I mean,
go ahead.
As I said, they actually don't need to make that choice. So it depends on what type of buying is taking place, of course. If we're just looking at the IDs, the issue we have with most IDs today is that there's no data attached to them yet, or very little. So it's very few publishers who have, onboarded some data to these IDs, or data providers that have done that. But so if we look at all the other use cases like frequency capping, reporting, algorithms which you use, historic visits to figure out who is more likely to click, then it doesn't really matter for the buyers. I mean, whether when they're buying on one particular publisher, that the algorithm is using, let's say, ID5 there, but using another ID, maybe a proprietary publisher ID on another big publisher, and let's say an ozone ID, for example, in order to optimize the click-through rate. That doesn't really matter to the trader. The important thing is that the functionality is there, of course. And I think one of the problems that we see a bit, especially in some markets, is that as long as we still have third-party cookies, I mean, the places where we see a lot of campaigns testing these things, it is in the markets where Safari and Mozilla, has a big share. Then it makes a lot more sense to already use all of these capabilities now. But if you take some of the markets where you only have 20% of that, then everything else works. So why would you go through a lot of hassle right now, running a lot of campaigns when you do have third-party cookies still?
Yeah. So necessity of all invention, effectively, in this case.
Well, I mean, what we're doing right now, we have quite a big push where we've then gone out to the agencies and the advertisers in most key markets to us and said, well, you need to start learning a lot of stuff now because I mean, Google said they would deprecate it within 2 years, and that was in January, right? So everybody has to assume that by December or January, the third-party cookie is gone. And using first-party IDs for frequency capping, it's a different story. I mean, they're not always unified. I mean, they're certainly not. I mean, in most cases, they're not unified, but they last a lot longer because they don't get deleted automatically. I mean, some of them last, you know, months or years. So there's just with the frequency capping alone, there's a lot of learnings that needs to be done with the data part that I touched. You don't have you know, the third-party data providers available anymore. So for a brand that uses particular audience sets, they need to then figure out which publishers can I get this sort of data from in a first-party manner, and start to, you know, make those learnings, because it's actually quite a big change in all sorts of things. So that's the way we are selling it right now to agencies, you know, to start make those learnings now. Because as Emma said, the volume is there. I mean, we see in many markets the same number of the same volume of first-party IDs now as we do third-party cookies.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you're making, Jakob, because there's 3 basic use cases that are supported by identity, right? You've got targeting, obviously, but you've also got frequency capping and measurement. For frequency capping and measurement, identity is a commodity. It's the enabler of, you know, the reporting and the optimization that Adform is going to do for the campaign. You don't care. You don't care which one it is. You don't care if it's on an Adform ID, on an ID5 ID, or on anybody else's, right? As long as it works, as long as it delivers the service that you're buying, right? So that, and I totally agree with you that in this case, like, it shouldn't even be available. Like, it shouldn't be an option for the buyer to choose from. It's just baked into the service, like cloud, right? Like, are you hosting your data with Amazon or with Azure? Don't care, right? It's built in. It's the infrastructure. With targeting, it's a bit different because you need to attach your data to an ID or a set of IDs. And what we're seeing here is that, well, some ID vendors are also data vendors, and so obviously they're pushing their own narrative. But in other cases, we see a lot of platforms building kind of multi-ID reconciliation capabilities, like graphs, right? To kind of connect an ID5 ID to like a unified ID and something else, and be able to do those reconciliation themselves. Because in the end, again, identity is a commodity. It's an infrastructure on top of which you want to build targeting, frequency capping, optimization, monetization, right? All of those capabilities. But the infrastructure doesn't really matter as long as it's scalable, as long as it's privacy compliant, right? It doesn't really matter. It's just an enabler of something that you buy as an agency, which is targeting capabilities and all those things. So I'm not too sure we'll get to a point where people will kind of select in a drop-down menu, oh, I want this campaign to run on ID5 IDs, or I want this campaign to run on like some other IDs, because it's not what you're buying. You're buying the ability to run the campaign, the optimization, the targeting, the underlying infrastructure. It doesn't really matter.
What you're saying is that the plumbing will be hidden away, but obviously those IDs have to have some kind of scale and be able to kind of connect to all the rest of it. It's not a case that, oh, I like LiveRamp, or I like ID5, or I like Zeotap, or whatever. It's more a case of like, this is what goes on in the background. And Diaka's point is like, it's measurement, it's targeting. It's really like, can my display campaign actually do what it says in the tin? And will this, you know, I don't really care what ID I use as long as it just delivers.
But then you've got to make sure that you're working with the partners that can ingest, share, utilize all of those multitude of ID partners, right? That's why I think it's really important you start to think about, you know, from a publisher working with an SSP, us or somebody else, preferably us. Saying, if anybody's wondering, you know, just to make sure that this is where choosing your tech partners is really, really important, because if you choose a partner that can't facilitate all of the options, then it becomes self-limiting.
And it's also why it's important for the partners to choose the right ID vendors. And when we work with PubMatic, we go through kind of extensive explanation of how the ID service works. We go through questionnaires, similar with Adform, like that's integration. How do you do this? Because you don't want to enable kind of shady practices. You don't want to take any risks for yourself, but also for your clients. And so there is a kind of a collective adoption momentum that really favors the good solutions that work for buyers, that work for technology platform, and those are the solutions that will emerge as the standard currency for the future.
Yeah. But don't forget, any solution also has to work for the consumer, right? So whatever we do has to be privacy first, and has to deliver, an experience that the consumer is comfortable with, and has to sort of rebuild some of the trust that perhaps the industry has lost over the years because maybe we didn't behave particularly well, or particularly with a privacy first hat on. So I think that sometimes, we can talk about this until we're blue in the face, and obviously we will, and we are the technology providers, and et cetera, et cetera. But everything starts and ends with the consumer at the end of the day. Yeah,
absolutely. So since Chrome's announcement, obviously there's been an explosion in the number of number of shared IDs being made available in the market. Do you think this is something that will continue in a year's time when things kind of dust settles, or how do you think things will sort of pan out, and who's got more chance to succeed and why? Is it a case of like being able to have those connections and being able to reconcile all that data? Because I imagine, like, Emma, particularly you guys are going to be working with publishers who have a lot of logged in data, first party data, and then it's been able to make that work. And I guess then it's up to Matthew to match that out with the IDs that Jakob has. So I'm just curious to see, will there be a consolidation in a number of share IDs? Because, obviously there's been news about the Trade Desk open sourcing their UID. So how many do you think will survive, Matthew, in that environment? What do you think, and what's the reason for success?
Yeah, I think so. I think it will be. It's a scale issue, right? You need scale, and you can't have scale with hundreds of IDs. It doesn't work, right? So you need you don't want necessarily one, because that creates all sorts of dependencies, but you don't want 20 either. So I think naturally the market will kind of standardize around a handful of identity solutions that are scalable by their method, that are scalable by their positioning on the market. I think neutrality is key, right, for adoption. If you compete with people in the space, then it's more difficult to be adopted at a greater scale. But we'll get to a point where there is just de facto standards, because there is like a large number of publishers who've adopted it and making them available in Biddercast. There's a lot number of platforms who are supporting those IDs, and the other kind of identification solution or data solution will align to those that are kind of ahead of the game. So right now there's a diversion, but like at some point it will converge back to a small-ish number of solutions that will hopefully be interoperable with each other. And we're already having discussions to that extent with some other ID vendors to enable scalability, because it's a currency. The value of a currency is completely tied to its liquidity, and so we have to be everywhere if we want to power kind of a sizable portion of the market and make it valuable for our clients.
Yeah, I think that since we've launched Identity Hub, just to give you some context, we've seen around 250 global publishers have adopted the solution across 20 markets. And we've so far partnered with 17 leading ID solutions. Of course, ID5 is one of them, and all the major DSPs worldwide. And I think that because we've been investing heavily behind audience addressability for several years, and obviously we continue to do so, I'm pleased to share that today the majority of revenue on our platform now has alternative identifiers to the third-party cookie and to Apple's IDFA. Which I think underscores the leadership position that we've taken, but also enforces the view that having alternative identifiers available at scale provides greater addressability than anonymous identifiers like the third-party cookie, for example.
Jakob, what's your take on
that? Well, I think right now we are actively trading with 48 different IDs. That being said, 48. Well, and actually the number is even higher. We classify a lot of them as publisher-owned IDs, and in that box, there's a lot of big publishing groups who have built up a data lake on their own first-party random number or first-party login, and they've started passing that ID. So I mean, that is going to continue. We see. I mean, you take Ozone in the UK; they have their own ID, for example. There's tons and tons of those, and that will continue. So we're always going to have many different IDs. But in terms of let's call it unified IDs or solutions like ID5, I think I mean right now it's just ID5 and Prebid, which are the two very big ones. And then further down the list we have some of the login, pure login ones like LiveRamp, etc. But I think my guess is that that's the situation that will continue. There will be more IDs coming along, etc. But scale, of course, really is important. But I also want to say that we talk to a lot of publishers who say, well, when they make the decision, then they just enable 3 or 4 because it's free to put it into the bid stream. So I mean, there's no particular reason for them just to have one, right? So yeah, I do believe we will continue to have many. But I really think that we will see Prebid and ID5 as the big ones, at least for the foreseeable future.
One last question. What sort of advice do you give publishers and advertisers for the post-cookie era? And when you talk to your own publishers, Emma, what do you say to them? Obviously use our solution, but but for general advice, how do you get them to prepare? I mean, obviously, try and get more logged in users, trying to get more first party data, etc.
So I think that when I talk to publishers and we talk about this, there's 3 things that I recommend. So firstly, they should start testing the available audience addressability solutions today. There's not a lot of time left until we enter this new cookieless era. So take this opportunity to test and identify the audience addressability strategy that suits your business. And do bear in mind that there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Secondly, we touched on this earlier, very few individual publishers have enough standalone scale to compete with the walled gardens. So simply pooling your inventory is not enough. Publishers also need to collaborate from a reader and a content perspective in order to identify behavioral synergies, such as how consumers want to read editorial, where they want to read it. And then from this position, publishers can make inventory available to media buyers in the way that they want to buy it, whilst at the same time taking advantages of the efficiencies offered by programmatic, by giving buyers more confidence in the quality of the data that is being used to execute their programmatic deals. And then finally, I think there's a clear understanding, and again, we touched on this earlier, that publishers need to do a better job of communicating the value exchange to consumers and then building solutions that put the consumer experience first. So predictive modeling based on audience scoring enables publishers to segment audiences based on the likelihood that they're interested in consuming certain content, which requires them sharing data in return. So for example, newsletters or community hubs or areas where they can access premium editorial. And if a publisher promotes these options through personalized messaging at the right stage of the consumer journey, that should then maximize the amount of first-party data a publisher can collect and transact against, whilst at the same time maintaining that trusted relationship with the consumer.
Excellent. Jakob, what would you say to the advertisers?
Well, I think I touched on it before, right? I mean, to get started, to get the agencies involved, making all these sort of first learnings on what does it mean when you trade entirely based on first-party IDs and data attached to that. And the way we sell it, of course, is one or make them do it is they need to prepare now, but also they can improve things quite significantly what they're doing on Safari, because now they have identifiers on almost 50% of the Safari traffic. So that opens up for quite better performance. We see around double conversion rates when they start to use first-party IDs from publishers, etc. So there is something to be gained also in doing it right now. So that there's an immediate, that it pays off right now. It's not just to prepare for the future. And the last thing we tell them is, I mean, it's not just about IDs, as I mentioned. I mean, the data part is really, really important here. So we are telling the big brands and have been telling them over the past 6 months to go out and approach the publishers that they want to work with and to push those publishers, if they haven't already, switched from a third-party ID-based DMP to a first-party based one, so that they have data that matches, the audience need of the particular advertisers, and it also helps, push those publishers along then when they feel that there's a real, their spend to be gained.
Matthew, ID5 are the Switzerland of MadTech, obviously. The plumbers of the open web, like Mario Brothers, I like to call them sometimes. What would your advice be to vendors? I guess you're kind of like the middleware for a lot of the connections. So what do you say to buy side, sell side?
I say now is the time, and we have another 6 months to transition collectively. Like nobody individually can be cookieless, right? Cookieless is a collective situation. Like it's an industry transaction process that has to kind of work on a different set of currencies, and so you can't wait for the last minute to become compliant. You have to anticipate this, because it's a collective movement. So now is the time. As Jakob says, there's already a good third of the world that is invisible if you're only using cookies, right? So there is short-term benefits to adopting a solution like ID5, because you're going to be able to address a lot more people than you can with cookies. You're going to be able to improve the performance of your campaign. That inventory is probably cheaper than Chrome inventory anyway. So there are kind of cost per acquisition improvement that you can generate. So don't wait up. The inventory is available, right? There's between 10, 15, 20, 30, 40% of the inventory that's available that has an ID5 ID, depending on the countries, right? So inventory is available. Technology platforms like Adform and PubMatic are supportive, are integrated. Just go for it, because we don't have a lot of time to migrate, and it's an existential opportunity, but an existential threat as well for the industry to reinvent itself in a more privacy compliant, more secure, and more efficient way. So,
brilliant. Well, we've got 12 months to get our act together, and then it's all over. The party ends.
It's actually going to be. I'm looking forward to the after party. The after party is going to be better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like the first party was crap. The after party was amazing. Got like some hip hop stars going through the nose, like real champagne. Guys, thank you very much. Emma, thank you. Matthew, thank you. Jakob, thank you. And thank you for watching this today. This is our Vodcast, and that was the state of the universal identifiers. And we'll see you next. No doubt we will see you next time, because there's a lot more to talk about around this. Thanks.